Hello, welcome to the weekly devotions of Trinity Lutheran Church in West Bend. I'm Pastor David Schoob. I welcome you. Christ is risen. Christ is risen indeed. We are just a couple days past Easter. It was last Sunday. You'll be hearing this on Wednesday. So yesterday here in Wisconsin was election day. I'm actually recording on that particular day. So it struck me that in this short period of time, we've suddenly experienced two kinds of power. Power that rests at the center of our lives. We embrace both. And we're caught between those two powers all of the time. And sometimes those powers come into conflict because they are remarkably different kinds of power. And so what I wanted to do this month is kind of reflect on power, both kinds of power, how they come into conflict, and the reality that each of us at various times has to choose between those powers. To start with, we read from the 19th chapter of John's Gospel. You might have heard this on Good Friday. So Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe. Pilate said to them, "Here's the man." When the chief priests and the police saw him, they shouted, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" Pilate said to them, "Take him yourself and crucify him. I find no case against him." The Jews answered him, "We have a law, and according to that law, he ought to die, because he has claimed to be the Son of God." Now when Pilate heard this, he was more afraid than ever. He entered his headquarters again and asked Jesus, "Where are you from?" But Jesus gave him no answer. Pilate therefore said to him, "Do you refuse to speak to me? Do you not know that I have power to release you and power to crucify you?" Jesus answered him, "You would have no power over me unless it had been given you from above. Therefore the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to release him, but the Jews cried out, "If you release this man, you are no friend of the emperor. Everyone who claims to be a king sets himself against the emperor." When Pilate heard these words, he brought Jesus outside and sat on the judge's seat at a place called the Stone Pavement, or in Hebrew, Gabbatha. Now it was the day of preparation for the Passover, and it was about noon. He said to the Jews, "Here is your king." They cried out, "Away with him! Away with him! Crucify him!" Pilate asked them, "Shall I crucify your king?" The chief priests answered, "We have no king but the emperor." Now, on this particular passage and a little bit of the piece before where Jesus claims that his kingdom is not of this world, I preached on during the ecumenical services here in West Bend during Lent. And in this devotion for today, I want to reflect on a lot of the pieces that were in that. So if you're at the sermon, you got a head start. In fact, most of my devotions this month will contain elements of things I have been doing in the past because I've been struggling with this for a very, very, very long time. So in this story, Jesus is standing before the representative of the Roman government, the most powerful force in the known world at that time. And Jesus doesn't back down. He challenges this power saying, "Well, you really don't have any power at all. God is the true power." Jesus lives a life that calls out the oppressive realities of Rome. And if we read all the Gospels, we find that this isn't the first time that Jesus has done this. People tried to get him to talk about taxes, and he said, "Well, give taxes to the Roman government." But at the same time, he said, "But you belong to God. And so your real obligation is to God." Another time, people brought a person who was caught in adultery and says the law means that we have to stone her to death. And in the end, Jesus says, "Well, the one who's without sin, let them throw the first stone." And everyone walks away. Over and over, Jesus enters into the messy realities of the powers of the world and politics and stands in the way of those things. Always to stand before those in power on behalf of those who are broken and oppressed by the powers. Jesus comes and stands in the way of the powers of the world so that those who are helpless might find life. And that has been the Christian tradition for centuries, since the very beginning of Christianity. In India, Mahatma Gandhi, though, through a method of nonviolent resistance, led his people to throw off British imperialism and bring freedom to the oppressed by foreign powers. Now, people would say, but he's not Christian. But Gandhi recognized the importance of what Jesus was about, and much of what Jesus said and did was at the heart of this movement. In the 1960s, using similar tactics, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke of the dream he had of a nation where people would be judged by the character of their lives and not the color of their skin. In the late 1970s, Archbishop Oscar Romero in El Salvador heard the cries of the poor in his land and acted to bring hope and justice to a society dominated by wealth and power. Nelson Mandela and Archbishop Desmond Tutu in South Africa provided light to lead their nation out of the dark night of apartheid to a new light of freedom for all. Mother Teresa confronted the powers of the world constantly, telling leaders everywhere, we can do no great things, only small things with great love. And the list goes on and on and on and on. Jesus stands before the powers of the world not with armies, not with weapons, not with wealth and accumulated resources, not with coercive power, but the power of love that embraces and protects those that the powers of the world lose sight of. When we were living in Brown Deer, we lived just down the road from an abortion clinic, and there was constantly brouhaha going on in that particular time with pro-choice people on one side, pro-life people on the other side, big protest. One night after one of these protests, it was all on the news, and Chris and I were watching, and they talked to one woman who had gone to the abortion clinic with hopes of having a procedure, and it was so wild there, she just left. And as the interview went on, she said, to those people, I was just a statistic. Someone they got in, someone they kept out. None of them cared about me. That's often the nature of power in this world. That's what continues today. And I believe that Jesus still stands in the midst of such messiness and calls us there too. And what he exactly calls us to, I'm not exactly sure all the time. I try to figure it out. But all I can do is my best. And I know it has something to do with love. I know it has something to do with standing with those that the powers of the world don't even notice as they pass their laws and regulations and fight their wars. I know it has something to do with realizing that all people are beloved of God, and that the kingdom is made up of people from all places and ideals and sexuality and gender identities and gender expression and races and creeds and political positions and economic realities and on and on and on. I know I have to try to do something even when I'm not sure what to do, because Jesus cares about this messiness we call politics, nations, laws, government, power, and calls us to care. Not through control, but through loving and faithful challenge of the way the world works. Jesus calls us to see and hear the cries of the people, the cries of God's children everywhere. That's the problem with power in our world, whether benign or evil. Our countries, Russia, Ukraine, Palestine, Israel, all the other countries of the world. All the powers of religious institutions and economic power and all the other powers of the world, it always functions by paying attention to some specific group of people. It may be the majority, as in our country, or the desirable, or the influential, or the rich, or the ones who are part of the system, or part of the country, or one particular person in specific. But never do these powers see the single individual who is hurting, who is broken by the power they wield. They never hear the voices, especially if those voices are not like the ones we are conditioned to hear in our lives. But Jesus' kingdom, Jesus' power is not of this world. And I think I know where Jesus was standing at that abortion clinic all those years ago. Not with the pro-choice people, though I think God truly loves all of them and embraces all of them. Not with the pro-life people, though God equally loves and cares for all of them. But with that one woman who no one else sees, who no one else really cares about, alone and in that place, overwhelmed by the powers at work around her, with a sense that those powers didn't care about her at all. Pilate is a picture of all the world's powers. Afraid to appear weak, afraid to hear the cries of the hurting, if it means having to go outside the lines, afraid to face down the powers that control their existence, afraid of death, afraid of having their power as the world defines it taken away. At the ecumenical service I preached, I sang. I'm not going to do that to you today. That would be really cruel. But I will put a link in to the song that I used at that service. I think it's a song that is the voice of God calling us to serve the kingdom of God when the powers of this world and the powers of our risen Lord collide. Good luck in this week as you think about the powers that you are called to serve and may come into conflict with one another. Where will you stand? Have a good week.